Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our Records and Retention Management Workshop. I am Jessie Chavez, and alongside me I have our National Service Officer, Tracy Rollins Johnson, and my colleague, Eliana Duran. This webinar is being recorded and uploaded to ServeDC's YouTube channel. If you have any questions at any point during this presentation, please feel free to submit your questions to our National Service email address at americorps@dc.gov. Today's workshop agenda is as follows. Introduction, background, define it, what is records management, AmeriCorps members, staff records, AmeriCorps items to consider in records, what is retentions management, AmeriCorps records retention, AmeriCorps items to consider in retention, questions to consider, electronic storage of records, retaining source documentation, frequently asked questions, ServeDC Online, and resources. Background. Organizations should have a formal records retention and destruction policy. Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 is a United States federal law passed in response to several major corporate and accounting scandals that address many issues with accountability within corporations. There are two components of Sarbanes-Oxley that directly impact the nonprofit sector, which include records retention and whistleblowers protection. Records retention is not a new requirement. However, Sarbanes-Oxley is an effective reminder of its importance. If your organization isn't a nonprofit, utilize this policy as a standard of care that is appropriate for all organizations serving the public. Records retention is also a grant requirement, so it is crucial to review your grant award and check with your auditor to be sure you are meeting the federal and state requirements. AmeriCorps generally requires that records related to AmeriCorps grants be retained for a minimum of 3 years after submission of the final financial report under the grant or until or after any federal audit is completed and resolved. Define it. Records management refers to a set of activities required for systematically controlling the creation, distribution, use, maintenance, and disposition of recorded information maintained as evidence of business activities and transactions. Retention is the act of continued possession, use, or control of something. What is record management? Records management, whether physical or electronic, digital, include evidence of activities requiring them to be stored and maintained over an extended period. While the definition of record is often identified strongly with a document, it includes any tangible, intangible, or digital information which has value to the organization. Records include all materials, regardless of physical form or characteristics, made or received by AmeriCorps, connected with transactions of public business as evidence of the organization, function, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities. As we continue with what is records management, some of the common records for management are documents created throughout the program year, items that require organizational action, documented organizational activities and actions, items mandated by statute or regulations, items supporting financial obligations and legal claim, items needed to communicate organizational requirements. All of these have some form of an example listed next to them. AmeriCorps member staff records. As part of overall member staff management, programs must establish sound record-keeping systems and procedures in the foundation building phase of the cycle of program development. The member staff record-keeping system will allow the program to fully document that it is in compliance with all policies and regulations that govern AmeriCorps members' staff management. Effective management of member staff files include confidentiality and effective measures to ensure that member staff files are protected and can be accessed for audit purposes. Destruction prevention of records, a system providing for backup and recovery of records. Clear images of identification, signatures, and member staff files. An accurate representation of member staff life cycles with the program. AmeriCorps items to consider in records. Be sure to include verification of eligibility to serve. This would include a copy of the documents you use to verify age, such as a driver's license or a birth certificate. Additional eligibility to serve documents are nationality and high school diploma or GED. Completion of all required National Service Criminal History checks. This would include NSOPW, the FBI fingerprinting, state check or checks, and assigned consent of the National Service Criminal History checks. All other documentation required in grant terms and conditions, AmeriCorps regulations, etc. Member staff files must include signed member contracts, resumes, job descriptions, timesheets, approved invoices and reimbursements, member benefit forms, member performance reviews, enrollment and exit forms. What is retention management? Action steps. There are several examples of various record retention and destruction policies. Reference internal controls of your organization to review file management and records. Monitoring corresponding legal requirements per documentation. It is important to make a complete list of all records and be sure to check with other funders as to what their record retention requirements are, which should be included in your contracting documents. Using this information, the policy should encompass all of the organization's needs and meet state and federal requirements. AmeriCorps record retention. AmeriCorps grant-related document retention policy requires that programs retain all records, including financial records, supporting documentation, statistical records, evaluation and program performance data, member information and personnel records related to the grant agreement for a period of 3 years following the date of final payment or completion of any required audit and resolution of any findings, whichever is earlier. Fundamental necessary records. NOGA, NOGA, CFR, AmeriCorps provisions, and grant agreements. Staff and member files, which include application, citizenship, proof of age, position description, expected service hours and requirements necessary to successfully complete the term of service. Member agreement member handbooks, policies, procedures, which include standards of conduct, prohibited activities, requirements under the Drug-Free Workplace Act, suspensions and termination rules, non-displacement, grievance procedures, financial policies, and procedures. The member service hours, performance measures, deliverables, data collection, retention, and enrollment rates. Also, the National Service criminal history checks, which include the FBI states and the NSOPW. AmeriCorps items to consider in retention. Who within the office oversees managing the records retention policy? When does the destruction of documents occur? How are documents destroyed? What are your funders' requirements? Where are the records stored? And what are rules for enforcement and or remedies for non-compliance with policies? Now I'm going to pass this off to my colleague, Eliana Duran, and she's going to continue to provide you much needed knowledgeable information.
Thank you, Jesse. Now we will discuss questions to consider. Where is your filing cabinet? Is it in the Grants Management Office, in the Programs Office, in an Accounting Office, or in an Executive Director's Office? How safe is your filing cabinet? Is it waterproof or fireproof? What is your filing system? By vendor, by month, by grantor, by subgrantee, or alphabetically? How are your documents filed? Do you have file folders or binders? Another system of records management includes electronic storage of records. The electronic storage procedures and system must provide for the safekeeping and security of records, including sufficient prevention of unauthorized alterations or erasures of records, effective security measures to ensure only authorized persons have access to records, adequate measures designed to prevent physical damage to records, a system providing for backup and recovery of records. It should provide for the easy retrieval of records in a timely fashion, including storage of the records in a physically accessible location, clear and accurate labeling of all records, and storage of the records in a usable, readable format. Where there is a requirement for a signature on a record, electronically stored records must include an image of the original signature. Records without signatures, when required, are considered incompliant. Retaining source documentation. The timeline of financial records retention requires programs to sustain records for 3 years post date of final report submission, including final report submitted by the commission or parent of a national direct federal. For example, if a grant ends July 31st, 2011, and then 90 days they submit the final FSR on October 31st, 2011. Records must be retained for 3 years until October 31st, 2014. If there is an ongoing audit, programs must retain all records until all audit findings are fully resolved. For example, if the grant ends July 31st, 2011, and 90 days passed, and then 3 years passed, but an audit started on April 1st, 2014, then the program must retain records until the final audit resolution on September 30th, 2015. Frequently asked questions. What is a record? Records include all materials, regardless of physical form or characteristics, made or received by CNCS connected with transaction of public business as evidence of the organization, function, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities according to the 44 U.S. Code 3301. Who should I ask if I'm not sure if something is a record or not? Each office has a records coordinator designated by the office head. Your records coordinator can help determine disposition according to the record schedules. I have a file that is in eGrants and also on my drive and in a paper file. What do I need to keep? Only one copy of records is required to be maintained according to its record schedule. There is no requirement to maintain drafts or duplicates. However, backup file systems are welcomed and advised. What are some basic principles that determine what we need to retain and what we dispose of? The basic principles of record management are articulated in the CNCS Records Management Policy. This policy includes both the General Records Schedule and CNCS Records Schedule. If you have a record in your office that doesn't seem to fall into the categories included in these two sections, you may discard it. If the record is in the General Record Schedule for the CNCS Record Schedule, you need to maintain the files that are specified. Can we throw away all paper files that are more than 3 years old? No. Desired terminated documents must be identified in the record schedule and its disposition for that specific type of record in order to know when you may discard. You may also contact the CNCS Records Officer for assistance. My program has boxes of member files from 1986 to present. What do we need to keep? Depending on the types of records in the files and the program involved, retention periods may vary. For instance, VISTA member alumni files that are covered by Section 9.3 of the CNCS Record Schedule are permanent. Other member records, such as VISTA payroll records, are kept at CNCS for 3 years after a member completes service and then held at the FRC for an additional 7 years. Consult your records coordinator and the records schedules to determine the correct action. What is the proper way to dispose of CDs, videos, and other outdated electronic media? Any CDs, videos, and other outdated electronic media ready for destruction should be disposed of accordingly. If the electronic media is a CNCS record, you will follow the disposition for audio-visual records in GRS Schedule 21 in consultation with your records coordinator. If it is a CD provided by a third party and no longer useful, you may discard or transfer the files to an online OneDrive. ServDC prides itself on its robust, responsive social media presence, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at ServDC. For more information, you can check out several resources including Managing AmeriCorps Grants, Grant Terms and Conditions, GPR resources, and AmeriCorps State and National Knowledge Network. Also, feel free to sign up for our AmeriCorps email list at www.nationalservice.gov. You can also submit any additional questions via AmeriCorps@dc.gov. Thank you so much for tuning us in and engaging in this virtual session. If you have any questions, please contact ServDC via email or phone at these addresses and numbers listed above.